Morning and welcome everyone to the third quarter 2017 results release of Grameenphone Limited. So for the event flow, we will follow the usual format which we have. At the very beginning, CEO will give you the highlights of the business for this quarter, followed by CFO will give the financial aspects of it, how it went around that thing. And at the end, we will have the Q&A session. So for the Q&A session, at the beginning, we will take the questions who are present over here at GP House, and after that, we will take the questions of the online panel which we have. So with this, I'd like to call upon our CEO, Mr. Michael, to take us through with this part of the presentation.
Thank you, Maruf. Colleagues, fellow analysts, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And I want to welcome you all again to GP House. You've been here many times before for most of you. For those I didn't greet at the door, welcome again. I'm going to spend the next few minutes highlighting the quarter, talking a little bit about the issues. Please leave your phones on, because that's the sound of money when it rings. So you can leave your phone on during my... Leave them on. That's what I come. Any opportunity for revenue is important. So let me talk through the first quarter. Yes, the disclaimer, you know those words, so leave it there. The highlights. It's been a very interesting third quarter for the company. It was very challenging operationally. As you know, we experienced rains that we haven't had in 35 or 40 years. We've had a disastrous situation in the northern part of the country, in Sylhet and in other places like that, in Rajshahi, and even to the doors of Dhaka, where much of the country was underwater. Yet our infrastructure was resilient enough to manage that situation. Mobile infrastructures are quite resilient, but they are not impervious to these kinds of issues. And the work that has been done to keep the network up and running was remarkable. And I say that not to tap myself on the back or our team on the back, but across the whole industry, the teams worked together. In fact, even yesterday, with the kinds of rains that we've had over the last 72 hours, was probably worse in terms of outages than in the period that we had in Q3. But I kept getting pictures of employees from all three operators, for example, together at the Electrical Supply Authority's offices, working with their crisis teams together to try and figure out what the best thing to do was for the people of the markets that we were serving and that were most severely affected. We are today announcing that it is 10 quarters of sequential revenue growth, which is admittedly remarkable and interesting for us and for our shareholders. We added 2.3 million additional subscribers to the organization. I can say that as of today, slightly after the end of the quarter, we've ticked over 64 million subscribers. And we added 2.9 million additional data subscribers in the quarter. And that gets us to 30 million. And that's a definition that's internal to the group. And that means they have to use 750...
150 KB, last 90.
Yeah, 150 KB over the last 90 days. Then they count as a subscriber for us. The national BTRC definition is much more liberal. Any use gets you to be a data subscriber. We only measure those that have had 150 kilobits of usage over the last 3 months, so that they're not accidentally falling onto the network and being counted. So it has been a remarkable quarter for the organization. I would say that there continues to be very strong market competition. We now have, as you know, the two other guys are getting their stories together, especially the ones that have gone through a merger, but they're still extremely hungry for business. So we're seeing very, very high offers, generous data offers of issues of 20 gigabits, and very, 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 very tough small offers like 3 gigabits for BDT 99 by some of our competitors. So they're going after customer acquisition. And you know, it costs a lot of money to acquire a customer in SIM distribution commissions, the taxes to the government. So 400 or 500 BDT per acquisition is not a bad number, even if it's 300. If you kind of get 1 million of those customers that churn after 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, then you end up spending 300 million, 400 million, 500 million on acquisition OPEX, which basically generates no real long-term value. We try to resist that. In fact, we resist it very effectively, because if you have 300, 400, 500 million in OPEX, imagine if you put that into CAPEX and what it means in terms of capacity over the long term. So we push back on that and we resist. We've had very, very good discipline in our commercial teams, offering very simple offers, very simple to understand. Words like 20% bonus, this kind of stuff actually does a lot better than these wild offers where people use the SIM as a disposable object. And so we feel quite strongly about that. The sub base grew 3.7% over the last quarter, and our SIM market share acquisition is actually pretty good. And we've maintained our SIM share at about 45.3% as of August 2017. Our growth in usage, as we will see a little later, is healthy. And having growth in the voice market anywhere in the world is actually remarkable. But we've had very significant growth. And I won't prepone the numbers. I'll let you talk about the numbers. But the growth in voice service alone continues, and we think there continues to be a lot of headroom in that area, although we can't give you any forward guidance. There is a lot of people in this country that still don't have access to a basic phone or have their own phone number. Revenue growth for me is very important, especially given that we have stable pricing in voice, and that's good. Data subscriber growth, again, we've done a lot of promotional packs at Eid, but they're all kind of reasonable things. They're not crazy stories, which means that we're able to maintain our the health of our EBITDA, the health of our ARPU, the health of our AMPU, and the health of our average revenue per megabyte. The floods were epic, and the company has decided to take a position going forward of being much closer to the population that we serve. I think it's fair to say that we're a big company. We've been seen as a big company. We may have been seen as being a little bit aloof in a way, and large and unattainable. So we will continue to seek opportunities to bring ourselves closer to the population that we serve. This was an unfortunate incident which we had decided to work on. We essentially gave to the Red Crescent a donation for the floods of about 100 million taka. This went to water purification, medical support, and food relief. And this is to understand a couple of things. We know what we're good at, we know what we're not good at. So we went through a very exhaustive process to find the right partner in this market that we could work with from a governance point of view and could be effective on the ground. So the Red Crescent is our go-to partner for disaster relief. This went to water purification, medical support, and food relief for our people. And it basically, 55,000 families, we're talking about 100,000, 200,000 people that were affected by our approach. And we do it in a fairly low-key way, very local way. So you won't see pictures of Carl or myself standing out there handing out a bag of rice to some poor old lady who has lost everything, including perhaps, now that I've put her on TV, her dignity. We do it very low-key. It's the right way to do charity. It's the right way to create an impact in the local communities, but also to do the right thing for our employees. So we send our employees out to do this, our field members of the community to go out to be part of the community. So you probably won't see me or Carl doing that. We're not politicians. We let our people take care of this and to get the benefit of their exposure to the communities that they serve. Some really good news. As we've spoken for a number of quarters, the digital side of our business is really becoming very important. And as you know, we've spent 160 years selling people minutes and 25 years selling megabytes, and that's no longer enough. We have to be able to start developing revenue streams that come from other places and to use these tools to develop our own native revenue streams in minutes and megabytes. So minutes, megabytes, moments that we can create value for consumers where they can act, interact, and transact on their environment using our services and our connectivity sometimes not. but also finding ways to monetize these moments are important. So we've got some really, really good positive feedback from the market in the last quarter, and we won 9 awards at the Digital Marketing Awards that was organized by the Bangladesh Brand Forum. This is really cool for us. It is a great plus for the team, and we won all 3 awards in the Best App category for MyGP, Wowbox, and GP Music. So we are going to continue to focus on this area quite importantly. It's not a lot of capital resources need to go into this, but the impacts are large, and that's, in fact, the model. Not a lot of capital resources need to go into this, but the potential outcome is large. See what happens with Bioscope and these kinds of products which we have right now, where very little bit of work goes into it, focused, well-planned, red way of work, minimum viable product, get it out there, try it again. Very not the telco model, very much the ICT model. And we're now able to actually develop value out of this for ourselves and for our customers. It creates revenue streams on its own, and it creates savings for us in terms of using digital tools to be able to sell and manage our services. And it creates opportunities for brand new independent revenue streams from the current business. The regulatory landscape, and I'm just going to do 4G last. I'll do the other ones going forward. The tower licensing guidelines are going to be out there shortly. We've had a number of discussions with the regulator. There are still some outstanding issues which we have issues with. That would include, for example, the ability for us to build our own towers. It is something we can work with. We want to be able to have a number of things changed in the guidelines. That process is proceeding fairly well. But we still have some issues that we may have to deal with the regulator. On the VAS guidelines, that process has actually been one of heavy consultation with the industry. There are a few things that we wanted, that we got, so that we were able to offer our own VAS services, and we're able to do that not only through third parties, but through ourselves. There are a few elements in that one as well that need to be worked on. Let me talk about the SIM taxes in a second. On the 4G license, there's been important developments since Wednesday. So what you see on this chart that says that the guidelines, and there was September consultations, and then we expressed our concerns again in writing when they were promulgated. There were 23 items on the list of things that we had concerns with that we shared with the ministry. When the state advisor came into town, he called a meeting last Wednesday. It was to be a 45-minute meeting. It lasted for 2.5 hours, where we ran through the 23 items with the state advisor, with the BTRC, their advisors, and the CEOs of the mobile operators and our advisors. And we were able to come to resolution on pretty much all of them. There's one left, but we think that's going to be sorted out. That was remarkable. So there now appears, we'll see what happens in writing, to be a way forward on 4G. Okay, so that's new news, and we think that's a positive outcome, and I think it was a remarkable set of meetings. So just to make sure that what happens now is we need to see the final published, and then we actually then go to make decisions about that or not. So I'm not telegraphing whether we will go or not. That's up to each operator now. But we now have a way forward that makes much more sense than was before we had this meeting last week, assuming that what was agreed in that meeting shows up in the final documents. On the SIM tax and the SIM replacement tax, I think the important thing here is the NBR chairman has formed a committee to seek a recommendation on how to resolve this issue. We have a very strong position. We believe our position is very defendable. The proportion of SIM replacements that happened in the historical period is essentially very similar to the proportion of SIM replacement we have now with biometric verification. So there doesn't seem to be any systematic, issues in the past than today in terms of the number of SIM that have been replaced. So we need to find an outcome of this, and we're going to work very hard to deal with that issue to get it resolved one way or another over the next number of months. But I think that is also kind of a piece of the business which we need to handle and get sorted out fairly quickly. And I think I will now move on to introducing Carl Eric. Carl Eric is a 21-year veteran of the company. He joined when he was 12 years old. You can see the picture, he looks, you know. He's highly experienced, likely the most experienced BU CEO or BU CFO that we have, I should say. And he's worked in Pakistan, he's worked in Hungary, but importantly, he's also worked in Digi in Asia, which is also a listed company. He's held kind of leadership positions with us in the group, in different areas and around the world. So we were very, very lucky to have him want to take up the opportunity and the challenge to work in Bangladesh. This is our capstone company, as you know. It is the biggest operation in the group. And I was really, really happy to know that he would be my partner here when I came here earlier this year. With that in mind, I will turn it over to you, and you can kind of start going through the actual financials, and we'll go to the Q&A thereafter. Okay? Good.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for the nice words.
Bill's coming.
First of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy to be in Bangladesh. I've been here now, you could say, since 1st of September. And I'm deeply honored to be the CFO in one of the biggest and most successful business units we have within the Telenor Group. GP was the first investment Telenor did in Asia back in 1997, and it's been extremely successful. So I'm both proud and humble to take the challenge as the CFO in a very, very strong organization like Grameenphone. I am now a part of a very, very strong management team in GP. And I'm serving one of the most experienced and one of the, you could say, most respected CEOs in our industry. So I'm very happy to be here. 50 days I count now since I started. I hope I will be able to, you could say, go through the numbers in the way that I did 17 times in Digi, but there are some details still that I need to get into, but I think I know the third quarter quite well. As Michael said, we have had 10 quarters now, sequential growth, both in total revenues and in subscription and traffic revenues. We are delivering a very healthy EBITDA margin of 58.7% in the third quarter. If we look at the 4 last quarters, we have 12% capex to sales. And we are delivering also a 5.16 taka earnings per share. Year-over-year total revenue growth, 12.8%. That's 3.7 billion taka higher revenues this quarter compared to the same quarter last year. It's basically 2 billion more in voice, 1.7 billion higher revenues in data, and then there is a slight decline in interconnect. We still see double-digit growth in voice, 10.3%, and we see also that the outgoing minutes are growing almost 15%. And we have, if you look at the average customer base in the quarter, we have close to 13% more in Q3 this year versus Q3 last year. If you look at end of period Q3 this year versus last year, it's 16%. So it's substantial growth, both in number of, you could say, subscribers, but also in the traditional services. Data, we have 42.2% growth in data revenues. And this is part, you could say, driven both by 31% increase in the number of data users, and a 67.5% growth in the total data volume. And for me, at least what I've seen in other markets, that's a remarkable monetization of data that we are able to do here in Grameenphone. We also see that the data revenues now contributes 17.8% out of total service revenues. As you see from the slide here, we have, as Michael mentioned, we are ending, you could say, the period with 30 million subscribers, active data subscribers. This is according to the Telenor definition, which is a minimum of 150 KB usage within the last 90 days. We added 2.9 million data users in the quarter, and we have added 7.1 million if you compare to the same quarter last year. And you see here the data revenues with then the 17.8% out of the total service revenues that we delivered in Q3. More on the KPIs, we are delivering you could say a growth in the service ARPU of 0.6%, and is very much driven by, as you see, the data ARPU. The data ARPU is growing 8.6%. There is you could say a decline in interconnect, but we see good growth in both data and voice. We see an increase in the service average price per minute, if you see here, of 3.8%. There is a fall in the voice average price per minute, which is more coming from in the data average price per megabyte, which is more coming from, you could say, the heavy campaigning that we have seen, especially around the Eid festival. EBITDA growth from higher revenue and operating efficiency, starting with OpEx. You see here that we are in Q3. We have an OpEx base of 11 billion. It's 1 billion higher than a year ago. Of course, with a total revenue growth of 12.8%, subs and traffic revenue of 15.3%. A lot of this additional OpEx comes from supporting the higher revenues. There are some one-offs as well in the quarter, so if we normalize, we have an OpEx growth year-over-year of 9.4%. The reported one is 10.5%. We also have, you could say, a one-time payment for the flood relief that Michael mentioned of 100 million to the Red Crescent. But I think if we look behind the OpEx numbers and see how much of that 1 billion is related to directly to support the higher revenues, then we are year-over-year increasing our OpEx with 110 million taka. And that's on the back of a network with 646 new coverage sites and 1,285 3G sites. And OpEx to sales, as you see here, it's 33.2% versus 33.8% 1 year ago. So there is year-over-year an efficiency improvement. But of course, it's important for us. It's important for us to grow, to continue to grow. but of course also as a part for Grameenphone, but also as a part of the Telenor Group, to show that we become more efficient day by day, quarter by quarter, year over year. So we are working a lot with operational efficiencies. 16.2% growth in EBITDA, that's 2.7 billion. It's of course coming from the higher revenues, 3.7 billion, and then partly offset by the higher OpEx of 1 billion. And if we normalize for, you could say, the one-offs, we have a 16.5% normalized EBITDA growth year over year, which is also, in my view, with my background, my experience, quite remarkable that we are able, quarter by quarter, also to deliver a higher EBITDA growth than service revenue growth. Because that means that the underlying, first of all, it means that we are good at monetizing our services, but it also means that we underlying are producing our services more efficiently, which of course is extremely important for us. CapEx is a bit low this quarter. As you see, it was the same in Q3 last year. We added 154 2G and 284 3G sites in the quarter, and we have 95% of our sites are 3G enabled. I think you also have to see this in the light of what Michael was highlighting. It's been a challenging quarter operationally, and as you see from you could say last year, of course, Q3 to Q4, you will see a different, you could say, or you can assume a similar development. For us, it's definitely not that we are holding back on CapEx. I think we can say that we are covering now 99.48% of the population with 2G and 91.91% of the population of 3G. And the Grameenphone, of course, for us, network quality, our network position will always be extremely important. So in the light of, you could say, a relatively low CapEx number in Q3, this is not because we are holding back. Definitely not. Normalized earnings growth of 17.7%. We have a normalized PAT growth of 1.1 billion. As you see here, we have some special items, as we had also last year, which takes down, you could say, a little bit of the growth, but still a very healthy PAT margin of 21%, and delivering then 7 billion. But we have a workforce reduction cost of 1 billion on the voluntary retirement scheme that were booked in the third quarter. We also have, due to the weakening of the Taka versus the USD, a foreign exchange loss of close to 500 million. And that's the main reasons why we see a lower net profit after tax growth compared to the EBITDA growth. And then looking at the earnings per share, you see here the 5.16 Taka per share. Cash flow wise, 17.5 billion. This is up, you could say, 2.7 billion from a year ago, coming from the higher EBITDA, of course, and the lower CapEx. We have a slightly higher net debt to EBITDA, which is more because we have paid dividends in this quarter, some higher taxes, which have an impact more on the cash balance. So nothing unusual with the level. It's still a very low level if you compare to other telcos, if you look at the net debt to EBITDA. So it's a very healthy balance sheet, that's for sure. To summarize, strong performance in a very challenging quarter. Healthy data subscriber growth along with revenue. Voice growth with price stability and growing revenue generating base. And higher revenue and efficiency in OpEx contributing to an improved EBITDA. And investment to continue for strengthening network leadership further. And then I'm used to, of course, from my previous job in Digi to give forward-looking statements, but here I'm not allowed to. And most questions would also be forward-looking, as I was used to. So I'm not sure exactly how we do the Q&A here, but
Carefully.
yeah.
So here we end, and I'll ask Maul as well to come over.
Great.
So we'll start the Q&A session from the audience with the first questions. I'm pretty much sure that you have got a lot of questions.
Who's first? There's no questions, we're all going home.
I'll start.
Go ahead.
My name is Asif Khan. So earlier this year, Grameenphone actually mentioned that it wants to set up a tower company as well.
Yeah.
And could you just go over the motivation of such a move? How does it benefit the company to set it up from a balance sheet income statement?
Well, first of all, we haven't made that decision. Second, we need to see the tower guidelines to see if we're allowed to make that decision. That may not be practical or useful. It's an option we might want to consider. And tower companies are built for a bunch of reasons, either to crystallize value out of the assets that are on the ground, to divest of them. There's a lot of reasons why to do it. But for me to speculate that we will, to me to speculate why we would do it would be very premature because I don't have the guidelines in hand. I don't have a burning need to do it either. There are some companies that need to do it because they need the cash. They want to set up and sell. They want to sell their towers. All that is kind of on the table right now for now. And there is, as you can see based on our financials, no urgent issue to do so. The second thing is we have 13,000 sites out there right now, of which 3,000 are actually already shared. We have some more that we intend to share. Therefore, this whole issue of tower companies there to create sharing is a little bit of a spurious argument for us. So too early, but when we know more, it's an option on the table and we may take it or not. Okay.
I'm Rocky from REC. First, I would like to ask that there was a proposal by BTRC to raise the floor rate of both on-net and off-net calls. Let's say that proposal comes into play, and considering you have the upcoming mobile number portability issue, how do you see that affecting overall? Because Grameenphone has maximum of your revenue on voice that comes from on-net calls.
It's a very it's a speculative question, and there's a couple of levels of speculation in there. I think there has been recent press, and if you may have seen it or not, from the Honourable Minister of State saying that they were not going to touch pricing at this point. I think that's fair. They may or may not do it. I have to understand that if they raise the floor price, they raise it for all operators and every citizen in the country in an election year. So I'm going to see if they do that or not. MNP in a prepaid market is not very effective. It's just a market inefficiency added in, where people just spin around. from one operator to another based on promotions if you allow them to. So usually there's a 45-day hiatus between changing operators or something like that. So we don't see MNP to be a huge issue for us. We don't think it's particularly productive to do this. I think most operators would likely agree with that. They may have different points of view, but we don't see that as a major problem for us at all. Okay?
I had another question related
Sure.
to 4G. I just wanted to ask how ready are the networks currently that you have for 3G to get online or get on board?
Well, the networks, you're talking about others as well. The issue for us will be there are some long lead time items that require that we upgrade our core networks and stuff like that, and those happen as a matter of course in our business, and those would be ready. The rest would be radio equipment changes. They happen fairly quickly. And if you look at the deployment guidelines as proposed today for 4G, they're fairly narrow and limited. So you don't need to do a lot of pre-buying or stuff like that to get that stuff up and running. It requires work on a few hundred sites to get going. And it's, again, that's not the major issue. Once we get clarity in view, then you can prepare more in advance. But each of us will do our own thing, and our customers will be the first to know. We won't announce it in advance. Okay.
I have a question.
Yep.
I've seen that data revenue growth has slowed down a bit. If I remember correctly, last quarter it was about 70%, but in this quarter it's about 42%. So why this slowdown? Is it because of some promotional campaigns or?
Two Eids in the quarter would be a big effect on that. That would be a big part of it. Also, I think you know, I can't give you forward-looking statements, but 70% data growth comes from 3G to getting 3G. 3G to 4G will be a different dynamic. I expect it will be, but I'm not crying about 40% either.
And I think we have also have to take into consideration as the base of data users are increasing, now being, you could say, close to 47% of our subscribers, the percentage growth will naturally come down, but still you will see nominally a strong data revenue growth. And as I said, I've never seen in any business unit such a high data monetization as I see in Grameenphone.
It's interesting, if you look at when 3G and 4G were launched in Europe and in North America, how long it took operators to get to 10%, 15%, 20%. They all had alternatives to data in their homes, broadband through cable or through fiber in some cases in some of the other markets. So they didn't do mobile broadband as much as we do here. But to get to 50%, literally 2.5 or 3 years after the launch of 3G, is not uncommon, but actually quite remarkable in any case, but it only happens in large Asian markets.
Any improvement on the data usage?
The usage per
User per month?
I don't have that in my head.
754 is the new megabyte per user.
754.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's increasing. You could say both the number of users and the usage per user is increasing, and which is natural because more people get access to 3G and faster data services.
And that's an indicator of network quality as well. The fact that the amount of data that's being used is going up is usually related to the use of video services. And Bioscope is an example of something that's out there right now, which is really driving a lot of video usage. So we expect that creating networks that will be able to cater to that is going to be less of a challenge here than it was in Europe, because the technology has evolved to allow us to do that. The way we use algorithms, the way we manage for spectrum, and the way the technology is now costed makes it possible for us to affordably offer services to a level where video services can be offered over mobile in an acceptable way.
Hi, I'm Ali from AHL Research and Consulting. I have one question on the CSO side. You donated a substantial amount for the flood victim. Do you have an exact number in mind for that? What was the amount being spent on flood victims?
Well, we have a standing agreement with Red Crescent, which actually exists, but we haven't formally, ceremonially signed yet. But it's so they come to us when they need something, and then we have a budget for the year which we kind of allocate as best we can. This was over the budget. This was over our plan for the year, to be candid. It was 100 million taka that we gave to them, and they basically used that in this particular case.
And I have a question on the data side of the business. Now we have 750 megabytes sort of usage per user. So what percentage of the users are using more than 1 GB of data per month?
I don't have that in mind. Do you have that in your head?
No, at that moment we don't have it, but
I can answer it in a slightly different way. 11% of our users have 4G enabled handsets, and they represent a very significant proportion of our overall revenue. So there's probably an 80-20 rule happening here, where 20% are really above the top. And by the way, they're not just urban people. There's no other options for entertainment in rural areas, so data is as important to them as it is to people in urban environments.
But you will find in this market, as in any other market, that there is a group of users that use a lot, and then you could say still probably here in Bangladesh the majority are not using that much. But the average usage is growing nicely, and we are able to monetize that usage.
Yeah.
In urban areas, there are alternatives, this broadband and others, which in rural areas, there is not much alternative. So what Michael has mentioned, we are also seeing that the growth coming from the outside of the urban areas.
In many of our markets, this is historic, in many of our markets, we built the networks outside in. We were stronger rurally than we were urban. And if you know, at this company, basically, we built 3G immediately to almost 10,000 sites because we knew the demand would be extremely strong rural, I should say. And so that's kind of the decision-making that comes with being a large international organization that allowed us to be successful over the last couple of years with the kind of growth that you've seen. So we continue to have these kinds of insights. Some of them we explain, some of them we keep to ourselves that allow us to continue to grow our business. Yes, sir.
This is Nafis from CA Brokerage. The service and maintenance fee has increased substantially compared to the last Q3 last year compared to this year. So what drives?
In nominal, it has to do with the number of sites and the number of 3G equipment we have out there. But on a per unit basis, we continue to operate very, very efficiently. And we will continue to look at opportunities to lower the per unit management cost of our sites, our radios, our TRXs, our site, all this stuff. But it has to do with volume mostly. It has to do with the growth in that piece.
It is. It's 646 new coverage sites and 1,285 new 3G sites. That's the main reason. But of course, we are working on reducing per unit cost per site, and we are successfully doing so. So that's why the increase is not sort of linear with the size of the network expansion.
Yes, sir.
This is Sana from Lanka Bangla. Same question as last quarter. We know that VTRC is working on some data price regulation. So when might that come into effect, and what kind of data pricing regulation might come into effect?
I don't know, and I don't know. So those are the answers. I expect that there is a really kind of fine balancing line they have to play. They can't increase prices much because there's an election coming and they want to increase Bangladesh. They can't, digital Bangladesh. Secondly, they can't reduce it much. We're the lowest or the second lowest in the world already. And we're the second highest taxed in the world already. Okay? The other thing is they can't hurt our revenue too much because about 50% of whatever we take in the top line ends up in the exchequer one way or another. So there's this whole kind of issue that they have to sort of, they may want to do things, there may be things they want to do to encourage poor people to have access to data. The best thing they could do to increase the access to data services is lower handset taxes on 3G and 4G enabled handsets. If they lowered the taxes on those, they could increase the penetration of those handsets, increase the availability of services to consumers, and increase the revenue to the exchequer. So I get that this is not a new thing. Operators and governments, I should say, always have this debate about pricing levels and so on. We'll see where it goes, but we don't see that as being a major, major, major unaddressable impact going forward. In the back, please.
So I have a couple of questions. First, the voluntary retirement scheme, I think, was offered once last year as well.
Yes.
And it is offered this year. So is this more or less becoming a normalized expense, or can this be expected going forward? That was number one. Number two, I see the company suffered about 500 million of foreign exchange losses in this quarter. What was the main reason behind it, and do you see this persisting?
Okay, foreign exchange, I'll leave to you.
Yeah.
And let me think about my answer on the other one.
Yeah, to take your second question first, and it relates to the loan that we have in US dollars and the weakening of the taka versus the USD. So it's not a cash flow related item, but it impacts us, of course, when the taka, I think, has been depreciating 8-9%, something like that, during the third quarter versus the USD. But it's not a cash flow item.
Yeah. On the first question, I have no anticipation of using or having a VRS next year. But if we do, the first people who will find out transparently and openly will be our employees. So I think I have to leave it at that. You have to respect the dignity of people who work for us. If we make changes to employment models, they find out first. Next question. Should we go to the lines or? Oh, please. No, there might be a couple more here. That's okay.
You mentioned the pricing in data is one of the lowest in the world.
Lowest, yeah.
And then one of the highest tax rates in the world as well.
Yeah.
But yet, the EBITDA margins, the return on capital are one of the highest also, at least across many companies I've seen. If you could explain why, what helps.
So I can't give you too much of the secret sauce, right? But or
That's like the recipe of Coca-Cola.
or Kentucky Fried Chicken. So you're not going to get what's in the 11 spices. But I think there's a couple of things. First of all, we have an incredibly powerful purchasing engine for the group. So we get extremely good CapEx prices and lots of impact for every taka we spend on CapEx. That's, I think, one piece. The second piece is a relentless approach, never being satisfied at where your cost levels are. You hear, oh, you can't do any more. I can't get, and all of a sudden you find new business models, new ways, new opportunities to lower costs. So I think those are two of the major things that happen. And then we look very clearly on how we serve customers better. And that means, you've seen in the last couple of years, great simplification in our product mix, our pricing levels, on the digitization of interfaces with customers so that they can serve themselves. And a KPI for us, which we won't disclose, is very much how many of our transactions are being done hands-free. How many of our commercial transactions are done without having exchanged cash? So we need to become much more digital. And those things, if you look at the business models of companies that have good payment instruments in their markets, it's very easy to do. Here, it's more difficult to do. So you actually lower the cost of serving clients, lower the cost of their demand for service by making the services easy, get the CapEx stuff in line very effectively through through the global procurement company, which we have, and then relentlessly go after OpEx expenses and lower those costs, lower those costs, lower those costs, so that we start to look more in our business model as the real competitors, which are the OTTs and stuff like that, as opposed to the guy down the street in red or the guy down the street in whatever color he has this week, yellow, I think. Okay? Next question.
Does the company have any plan to go for cloud storage services?
We do it already, but to the extent that it can be a private cloud or a public cloud, there's different ways of doing it, but we have regulatory requirements in this country where you cannot store stuff outside the country. So a cloud service can be a private cloud service where the equipment is in Bangladesh, or there might be a change in regulations over time that allow us to convince the authorities that it can be done outside. But that's an important piece. That really is an important piece of, putting the hardware in the cloud. The whole operating system of a phone company does not need to be physically here. It can be in the cloud. So there's all kinds of things, yeah.
It's basically just virtualization. it's not the traditional way that you need to buy a server for that application and then a server for another application. And it is to have more seamless IT and not the traditional IT setup as a telco. So,
but discussion is going on with the regulator on this data storage and also network equipment storage outside of the boundary, which will definitely bring the efficiency in the future, at least like in the digital age. But the present regulation doesn't allow, so we are working.
Okay.
The other thing is the distribution commission that you are spending with your partners for distributing minutes to your subscribers. Recently, in the last quarter, we have seen a tick up. It's like 7.9% of revenue. So, is there any plan to go for more of digitized version for distributing commission and cutting down this cost further?
Well, I think there's two things here. One is what happens during a heavy promotion period when there's two Eids, so I have to watch that trend, but it's an important cost item. And the second thing would be the more of those transactions that happen virtually through a mobile wallet, through a bank account, through not a physical transaction with an individual over a counter, the lower the cost of commission goes. So the answer to your question is yes, we would look for those opportunities. But there are other things that we can do with our retailers to make more money for them. But the commission piece is a different story. Yep.
and it's also a question about, I think, more and more customers will they will demand a digital interface towards the service provider, and it's important for us, of course, to be the number one service provider for those who want a digital interface towards us.
Okay. Further in the room? Should we ask if there's anybody in the ether that has questions? Nothing there yet. Okay, good. Okay.
So with this, maybe we can conclude.
This one last call for questions inside the room, if there's any. Okay, we're going to be hanging around for the coffee and stuff like that. If you have some questions you want to ask one-on-one, that's okay. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.